Welcome back to the Thought Leaders podcast. Today, I am with a thought leader that is literally changing families, changing generations of people through holistic finance and investing. I'm here with Luzy King, and we are going to get into money. And I want to just start off with, why do you believe that learning more about our money is so revolutionary?
I love that question. Thank you so much for having, by the way. I came from a household where money was such a big taboo topic. So no one in my family was talking about money. Everyone talked about working hard and everyone talked about following the traditional blueprint of what my mother thought was the American dream. So work hard, go to college, have a career, and give your loyalty to an employer in return of a paycheck and a 401k. And so for me, when I decided to become an investor in 2019, I wanted to really embody my own definition of the American dream. And for me, that was having wealth, not just the currency, but actually reclaiming my purpose. And so anybody that I coach, anybody that I talk to, is I want them to really focus on the importance of the benefits of you, which is just one person making the decision of, I need to stop exchanging my income for my labor.
I want to highlight right there, you didn't say, I started investing or I started learning about investing. You said, I became an investor. It's an identity for you.
Yes.
Was that intentional right from the beginning, or have you stepped into this identity?
No, I had to do so much unlearning before I decided to become an investor. And one of them was really embodying the fact that I was carrying the trauma of money that I didn't know I have for decades. So, as I mentioned before, my family never talked about money. Like for me, survival and working hard was all I knew. And it became very normal. Like fights around money was something that I experienced a lot growing up. And so for me, I assumed that every single family was going through that. And it wasn't until 2018 that I became aware that I was carrying the trauma of money. And that moment felt like physically feeling this impulse on my lower back of like, as if my back was like shattering. And I was like, what is the feeling? Like, I'm not embarrassed. Like, it just feels different. And so I decided to get very curious about what is that feeling about. And I'm not going to lie, it was one of the most scariest things I've ever done. But I was curious and I decided to say, I'm going to find what this is. I started to seek answers because I knew I wanted to break the generational cycle of being in debt, living paycheck to paycheck, even with a corporate career. And so I remember literally Googling, like, why do I feel uncomfortable when I talk about money? And I searched the web and it eventually took me to trauma of money or financial trauma. And I was like, what is this? Like, I never heard of it. And as a high achieving Latina, my first reaction was, holy shit, like I have trauma. So that must mean that I'm broken. Like I'm done. Like my career's over, everything is over. And so I decided that I wanted to become a millionaire, like the first millionaire in my family. And for me, that wasn't just about the currency. Looking at my network on an app wasn't the goal. The goal was going through the process of what is it going to take for me to start? And then the goal is $1 million, but what am I going to learn in between? Like, what is the transformation that I'm going to embody because I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to teach other women in underserved communities. Like sometimes in our society, we focus about the start and the end goal, and we forget the building wealth is a journey. And I started to focus so much on like the inner work that was required for me to break that cycle. And have loved every single aspect of it, to be honest with you. It hasn't been easy, but I have fallen in love with the process of becoming the first one in my family to be on track to make work optional by 45.
I just got tingly. That's so good. Okay, so we're kind of fast forwarding, right? But I want to go back. So you Googled and you were looking up and it said, you might have money trauma. And at first you didn't want to accept it right away. what was the first step that you took to go a little deeper?
I had a desire to really become the best version of myself because I was in the process of, like, I had a child in my womb, like I was expecting a child, and I had so much drama around becoming a mom because for so long I was always told, like, oh, you're not going to be a good mom because you're not having kids when you're supposed to. Like, I had my first daughter when I was 35 years old, and so I was always hearing this cultural narrative of, like, you're old, you're aging. When you become old, you're not good at X, Y, and Z. And so I said, if I want to be a good mom on my own terms, and part of that was I have to heal, not just for me, but also for all of those women before me that sacrificed so much, that didn't go after their dreams because culturally we're supposed to just become the wife, the mom, the one that cleans the house. And I was like, no, I want more for me. Especially after I learned that I was expecting a girl, I was like, I want this girl to take on the world once she's here. And that's really what shifted for me. Like, I want to become not the parent that my mother wasn't, because I think that she did everything she could with the information that she had, but I wanted to rewrite what it is to be a mom, especially a Latina mom. And I'm ambitious. I want to be more than I could ever imagine. And so I knew that inner healing was essential for me to tell my daughter, yeah, you can do whatever you want.
And now you have these beautiful pictures of your daughters, like you'll post and you'll talk about how they are young and they are investors already, right?
Yes.
Like they are just absorbing something so different. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I first of all didn't know that your children can invest. But the more I became comfortable talking about money, and not just talking about money, but actually also growing my capacity to receive money, because as an entrepreneur, people were paying me what I was making in 2 months in a day, right? For me to offer my services, my coaching. And so once I grew my capacity to earn, then I started looking at, wow, okay, so now I'm making all this money. What am I going to do? Okay, I'm going to invest. And I decided to have what I call my board of directors. So I started having conversations with bookkeepers, with accountants, and they were talking about like tax strategies. And I also come from a cultural background where taxes equals like, no, more money, more taxes. Like, we don't want to earn more, right? And so I got so well informed of the benefits of legally hiring your kids through your business to give them literally the opportunity to go to college tax free. And I was like, wait a minute. And then my mindset was, well, does that mean I'm going to create trust fund babies? And in this society, a trust fund baby is seen as something that maybe is not a good person. And then I was like, wait a minute. Just because I'm doing this doesn't mean that my children are not going to be that. And so, yeah, I decided to invest for them, or first of all, legally hire them through my business. So our family has a total of 3 businesses combined. And I said, I'm going to do it. Right. And at first I was like, is this even like legal? I had to have the conversations with the right people. And yeah, every year I write them a check with their name on. We pay them $12,000. It increases every year. But then what we do with that money is we put it into 2 accounts. One is a college savings account, and the other one is a custodial Roth IRA. And so these girls are already millionaires, even if I don't invest anything, right? And the strategy, you can Google the strategy. But what it took was me making the decision to change my own trajectory so they could feel the wealth and abundance is completely available for them, and they understand money. Like, my oldest is 6 years old. She completely understands money. She knows that it's not just about what you have in your bank account. She understands how credit card works. She knows the difference between a wealthy person and a rich person, and she's comfortable around everything, not just wealth, but also going to places where maybe people don't have as much as we have. And she's just like, I'm here. I'm enjoying every aspect of it. So yeah, I can talk about my girls all day long.
I just So obsessed. Like we could go in so many different directions, but just there's been so many moments that I want people to go back and listen for. And it's not even the strategy that you're saying, but it's the way that you're saying it, one, to the way that you are describing the evolution. And so I want to go back to, what does your capacity to receive mean for someone who's hearing this for the first time? How do they know what their capacity to receive is?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the first thing that people need to do, especially, I know you have a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to the podcast. And so, first of all, we need to really download. I call this like doing a brain download of what thoughts do we have about our clients or potential clients, because a lot of people can think like, oh, if I charge 360, that's a lot of money. Somebody else can have the thought of, if I charge $6,000, that's a lot of money, right? And so when you don't make the time to understand what are your thoughts about your client, and two is how do you want to feel when you receive the money, then because your brain is doing its work, which is protecting you, it starts thinking like, oh, it's just a fluke, it's never going to happen again. Somebody pay $6,000 for our services, but now what if we don't give them results, right? Like the brain is like creating all of this false narrative about why you're not deserving of the money, versus you thinking about, I'm going to help this client get amazing results and watch me, right? Like that's the energy that I have. And also, another thing that I do when I receive money, because I do get paid more than I've ever made in my life, is I get those emails from Stripe, which is who I use for the payment processing. And I'm never like, yeah, I did it, right? Like I never have the energy of like, I'm a badass. I have the energy of like, I am so grateful for this client that trusts me with their transformation. And I know I'm going to triple the change for my client. And with this money that I'm receiving, I'm going to create more jobs and I'm going to help more people. So the money that my clients pay me is not just for me to invest more, it's because I create jobs through my company, or I donate money as well to organizations that I care for. And so the energy is always like, there's always more, right? But my focus is my client. My focus is not, my God, somebody paid me 6,000. That means I only need two more clients to hit my goal. Like I never have the energy. And for me, that has been so transformational. And the more I practice that, like I literally hold my hands right here as I'm doing it, the more I do that, the universe sends me more and more money and more clients. And I just love that.
I love, love, love that. It's so interesting. We were talking before the interview, right? Of like, it's about just getting that one more person, not because you're getting them for the goal, but because you're like, you're helping them. You're like, wow, I get to help one more person. And I have a mentor who shared, every time you think like, oh, I need to get one more person to hit my goal, you're being selfish in thinking of yourself before thinking of serving,
Yeah.
rather than saying like, oh wow, I want to go serve one more person, and just that mindset shift. So I'm really glad that you shared that. And so if someone is hearing that and they're saying, Ugh, I have been thinking that way, I've been thinking very transactional, I've been listening to the rhetoric of 10K months and six figure year and all these things, how do they start to shift and just be a little bit more open to receiving a little more?
Yeah. I mean, I think all of us fell in the trap of like the 10K months, the six-figure business. But it's like, what if the identity is, I want to become a six-figure leader, right? Because a leader is not going to be thinking about revenue. A leader is going to be thinking about the results, the transformation, the vision, the impact. And with, especially with money, like, every decisions that we take for our business and our personal life has an economic impact on somebody else, right? And so how can you think about tripling the impact rather than thinking about like, yeah, 10K months? What if it's like 10 lives that you change? And I'm very big on like nervous system regulation. We have been taught, especially on the online space, of the strategy. Like, this is the launch game, this is the launch plan, and it's gonna happen. And then when it doesn't happen, we're like, oh my God, there must be something wrong about me. When in reality is, we have to work just on the launch strategy, but also on the mindset, identity, and the nervous system strategy. Because what happens when you receive all of this money at once, let's say that is 10K, and you're like, nah, your body is not physically ready for that because you've never seen that much money. And so I will say to those people, as you create a launch strategy, also create a strategy for your launch. Maybe under goaling, maybe it's about planning in advance. So when I launch, like, I'm not physically like posting everything the day off. I'm like having coffee with my friends. I am out in like I love to run, so I will go out to run like as the launch is active, because my nervous system needs that. My brain needs that distraction to know that I am safe creating more money. And the other thing that I will say is like literally draw almost like a funnel on a piece of paper, kind of like the marketing funnel that we all have been taught. And that's your capacity to receive, right? Like, how do I want to feel when I make 10,000? How do I want to feel when I make 20, 30, 50? And you really have all the answers. Like, I don't have the answers, right? I will help you identify the questions that will give you the answers that you already have. But once you practice growing that capacity, sky is the limit. And while you're doing that, please also invest.
Yes, that's so powerful. So you said there's questions that you'll have people ask. So one of them was just how do you want to feel? Is there another go-to question that you use when you're helping people expand their capacity?
Yeah, I always say, like, also have a plan to fail, right? Because in the online space, we have been taught to have the winning strategy. Like, if you create this funnel, it's gonna work. If you post 3 times a day, it's gonna work. If you use my framework, it's gonna work. But what if it doesn't, right? And so one of the things that I coach my clients on is, what is, yes, create the winning strategy, but also create the failing strategy. Like, how can you fail but feel safe? And so I talk about clients, like, for example, one of the questions that I ask is like, who do you want to become through this process? Right? Let's say that you have your lunch plan. Let's say that you have the invitations, the IG lives, the podcast, everything. Who do you want to become if things don't work out? How are you going to react? How are you going to be talking to yourself, right? Are you going to be adopting the narrative of like, oh, my business is not good, my offer is not good, well, now I don't have the money to pay my vendors, now I don't have all of these, right? Versus like, I know that even if this launch fails, there's so many more people that are waiting for me to be served. I know that if my launch fails, I'm going to learn so much about myself through this process, right? And I know that I have business savings that are going to get me through this launch, even if it fails. Like, I know that financially I am safe. And that's why looking at your money is important, right? Like, I teach this to people, like, look at your money from a place of not just like, what is the dollar amount that I have, but let's say that I have $10,000. Like, is this $10,000 help me feel safe when I'm launching?
So good. And is there an experience like recently that you've had of really feeling that moment of failure and instead turning it into a moment of becoming?
Absolutely, yeah. So throughout my business, I have had 2 failed launches where I have the strategy, I posted in advance, I'm out with my friends having lunch, and then nobody buys, right? And the first time I made that launch mean everything about me, right? Like, I must not be a good coach. Now, what am I going to do? How am I going to make more money? But then what I didn't realize that it wasn't never about the launch. Like, it was about the process. So I call these like the transformation points that go through the time when you're launching. And so I was licking my wounds, and then I allowed myself to feel all of my emotions, by the way. So I was angry, I was sad, I was upset. And what I've noticed was that the narrative that I was giving back to myself was, well, your offer is not good. You must be saying something wrong. What if people don't understand you because you kind of have an accent, right? What if, like, maybe the company name is not good enough? What if the logo is not, like, all of these things, right? On my second launch that I had that also flapped, this was like a year later. I had a safe plan. Like, who do I want to become, and how am I going to let this just be about people are not ready to buy, right? So I got so curious about my client. I forgot about the launch and I got curious about my client. Like, what does my client want to hear? Because sometimes I think, well, I have to have the graphics, the logo, the offer, the right pricing, all of these, right? And then I said, what if I don't make this mean anything about me or what I think I should be saying? But what if I make it about my client? What does my client want to hear? What are my client objections? Is my client afraid of the investment? Like, how can I make them feel safe? What if my client never spent like $500 on themselves, but here I am asking them to invest 2,000 or 6,000, right? Like, how do I want my client to think about this investment? And once I did that, the next launch that I had, I actually had one of my biggest launches, and I couldn't even believe, like, oh my god, like. And then I always do like I also do an audit of the things that I did strategically, but also the how what was going on through my mind. And with any launches that we have, especially as entrepreneurs, like, a launch could really become an event that causes you to start having money trauma, just like a if you get laid off from your job. That's an event that could bring that up or that could cause that. And so always having a plan in place for making sure that you are speaking to yourself from a place of giving yourself grace versus thinking about the don'ts or that I didn't do this right.
Yes, and having that post launch. So I've heard a lot of people talk about the post launch reflection, but from that perspective of what you're sharing, of if you don't, maybe it can turn into a money wound. It can turn into something that you just never process, and you take that into the next launch and the next sale and the next thing. And that's very good.
Yeah.
I'm reflecting on that
Yeah,
too.
you make everything transactional, right? It's and then you're like, wait, was that link even working? And like you start creating all of these, and you know, that launch should never be about you. The launch should always be about your client and the transformation. And from a place of money and abundance is like thinking about, like, what if my client, for example, in your case, like, what if my client launches the podcast that is going to become like the next, top Apple podcast. And from that place of you welcoming what the universe is already holding for you, then your client gets the result, you get the money, and you're like, wow, right? And when you are in that place of service and abundance, then it becomes easier for you to truly allow your money to start working for you. That's when you start trusting investing, when you're like, I can put my money in the stock market and not feeling afraid of I'm going to lose it, right? Because you are creating this identity of I know how to create money because I'm giving my client results. And that will change everything.
Something that just made me think of was another money wound, money trauma that people have is investing in a coach, investing thousands of dollars in a program and saying that it didn't work out. And how can someone start to heal that so that it doesn't keep them from a better, more aligned investment?
I love that. I think one of my coaches calls that like coach hurt, right? I've had a couple myself, right? And typically and this is just based on my personal experience, when an investment hasn't worked out, it's because I made the investment when I wasn't aligned with the vision of my business. Like, I was what I call money hungry. Like, I just wanted to get teach me the strategy, I need the money, right? The other thing is, people don't understand the importance of working with a coach who has values that align with you. Because you can have a coach that is going to tell you post 20 times a day on Instagram. But if you're not the person that has grown the capacity to be so visible, you're going to fight it, right? And the third thing, the only time coaching doesn't work is also because you're not doing the work. You want the coach to give you the strategy versus you looking within. And I've done a lot of that where I tell people, show me how to do these. And then I'm following their framework, or I resist the type of work that they really invite me to do. Like, for example, I have a coach that say like, you need to self-coach. You need to listen to your brain. I was like, I talk to my brain all the time. I need a strategy. I have a business background. And so that's how my brain operates. Like, give me the strategy. We're going to follow this plan. But then once I started looking at like, okay, I have this strategy, I'm doing all of these, like, what am I missing? And for me, the piece was believing that the inner work is just a piece of crap, right? I'm like, yeah, whatever. Just no, I needed that for me. And so if people that have had an investment that maybe didn't pay the way they thought it will, is like, what if you focus on being realistic to yourself and saying, okay, did I really do everything that was part of the program? And then two is like, was there anything at all that this coach said to me that completely made me think different about just one single thing, right? And also it's like, move on from the client or from the coach, right? That coach is probably going to continue to do the same to other people, but that doesn't mean that it is your job to prevent that from happening. Your job is to focus on the growth of your business and your client results, right? Like, I was so angry about the one time when I invested $15,000 and I was promised like 100K launches and all of these, right? But then I realized that the whole time I was with this coach, my body was like, get the hell out of here, Lucy. Like, this is not for you, right? But I didn't listen because I was like, nope, I got to get my return on investment. I need to have, like, I was obsessed with getting the result versus focusing on, like, was there ever one thing that this coach said to me that made me think different? And once I did that, I was like, okay, I'm healing this wound, moving on, and now I invest, in myself, like, all the time. Like, we have to, as leaders, as thought leaders, like, we have to always see ourselves as the biggest investment. Girl, like, I've invested in coaching where there has been literally two questions that the coach asked me about how I think, and it has transformed my life, right? So sometimes that's the result. Just having a coach that asks you one or two questions that you're like, wait a minute, right? Like, I remember me telling somebody, when you invest in the stock market, you stop exchanging your income from your labor. And they were just like, what? I'm like, yeah, you don't physically have to work for money. Your money's working for you. And once they have the evidence that it works, meaning they can actually invest and they look at their dividend pay, then they're like, wow, this is possible for me. So I don't know if that helps.
So powerful. I think it's just, whether we're talking about in the beginning that personal hurt, that personal identity of building. Now we're talking about coach hurt, but there's so many different things that you have broken down for us today. And I know that there's so, so, so much more. So, where can people find you? Where can people learn and get into your world so that they can also be almost work optional by 45?
Yeah. And I will say, like, even dream bigger than that, right? Like, we, just because we are work optional doesn't mean that we shouldn't use our economic power to help other people, other communities. Excuse me. And so people can find me on Instagram at Say Hola Wealth, or they can also listen to the Say Hola Wealth podcast.
So great. That's going to be included in the show notes and also the website. And thank you so much for just sharing all of this. Like, people need to re listen to this one and catch the way that you're speaking, the way the words are coming out, not just what you're saying.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.